into today's. So good afternoon, everyone. If you do not hear, my name is Natalie Jones. I am the Director for Advocacy and Research here at Tennessee Nonprofit Network. It is lovely to see you all this afternoon. And today we are talking about how to best prepare for this legislative session. Again, we have our eyes on our upcoming advocacy summit and Day on the Hill, but the information that we'll go through is really just general information for all nonprofits in Tennessee, how best to kind of think about and how best to position ourselves here in this new legislative session, which happy Tuesday, January 14th. Our legislature here in the state is exactly 2 hours old at this point. They did ring in their, this upcoming, I think, 114th session today at noon. So if you, are a C-SPAN watching person, this is being live streamed. So you can go onto the website that we'll be walking through later on this afternoon if you want to talk through anything or listen in. I hear there's a very exciting rule setting session going on. So if you're like, ooh, legislation and rules, sign me up. We will talk about how you can tune in and watch anything today or moving forward. So let us proceed forward. So if you haven't heard yet, again, we do have our advocacy summit coming up on Tuesday, February 4th. That will be held at the historic Scarrett Bennett Center there in Nashville, Tennessee, from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. We won't go through this, in depth right now, but we do kind of have just a quick snapshot of the schedule here. If anyone is interested and needs some more details, happy to, check in with you kind of off screen. And then the very next day on Wednesday, February 5th, we are actually going to put all the advocacy skills into practice as we go to our state Congress and start meeting with our legislators. Woo. And we'll actually be kind of walking you through how to schedule those meetings and how best to kind of position, again, your nonprofits and talk through and utilize that time with your legislators. Also, if you have any interest in that, I highly, highly recommend you also tuning back in Thursday morning at 9 a.m. because our dear lobbyist, Adam, is going to come and be presenting, and he has been a lobbyist at the Tennessee Capitol for many years, advocating on behalf and lobbying for the Tennessee nonprofit sector as a whole with a lot of the clients that he represents, and he is the best when it comes to kind of talking about how best to position yourself in the legislative session. So moving forward, a few other things just in preparation. Again, congratulations, you have made it to how to prepare for Tennessee's legislative session. Thursday will be how to prepare for a successful Day on the Hill. And then for our advocacy summit registrants, you also will be receiving calendar invites for 3 other kind of content areas, specifically around kind of getting started, cultivating that message and structuring your ask, and then some case studies for advocacy. And then registration is still open. So we have moved through that. Okay, so let's dive into the meat of today's presentation, where welcome again to the legislative session. It is January. Things are kicking off. Things are happening. We have a new administration at the federal level. We have a returning administration here in Tennessee with some new faces, at least at the state capitol. But what all does this mean for nonprofits and for the sector? And one place where I just wanted to start out is placing us within our kind of national and federal context with a few things for us to just be aware. And we will continue to see as we move throughout 2025, especially in this kind of first 100-day period, really what that might shape up to and really see that impact here in Tennessee. So at the federal level, at the national level, I hope this will not surprise anyone, but we will actually be welcoming a new administration under President Donald J. Trump Jr. Senior, Donald J. Trump in January. So Inauguration Day is coming up on Monday, January 20th. And actually, his cabinet is currently being approved through the Senate as we speak today. So we will have a new administration there at the executive level, depending on, how those cabinet level positions get approved. That may have some ripple effects. It'll always have a ripple effects, but what those ripples may or may not look like, again, will kind of depend on who is approved and goes throughout that process. So just stay tuned on kind of where all of that is. And then with the legislative branch, the latest Congress, I think it's the 115th, if anyone's curious, was sworn in on January 3rd. So they are up there in Washington, D.C., doing what they do best, talking with each other, debating policy, all of those good things. And they have started. It is a Republican-led House and Senate, which has been different than what we've seen in kind of recent years. So, for kind of the first time in a little while, both the executive branch and the legislative branch are both held by the same party. So again, nothing crazy. We will continue to see, how that continues to move through as we move kind of throughout the rest of this year. But just again, something to be aware of the same party, which is the Republican Party, does control both the executive branch and then both houses of the legislative branch, Congress, which is the House of Representatives, and Senate. So the other thing, just, to make sure all of our branches are covered, judicial branch is also, with the U.S. Supreme Court, is also in session. And they've had a couple days of arguments already, and then they will continue through the rest of the year. So, and Washington, D.C., all gangs assembled, and we are ready to rock and roll this year. Now, a few kind of, what are we rocking and rolling on? Great question. So there are a few key items of interest for nonprofits that are happening at the legislative level, at the federal legislative level. First one, the 2025 tax debate. Now, before I lose anyone to Snooze Town, because I'm like, taxes, tax debate, why on earth do we care? Well, back in 2017, when the first Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was passed, part of that piece of legislation, in addition to a lot of different, tax reforms and things being cut, because Republicans typically, like cutting taxes. That's part of kind of what they do. Part of that piece of legislation was something called the standard deduction, where, you've probably filed your taxes or have tried to avoid filing your taxes and then just hit a button and said, please submit. The standard deduction was increased to help simplify the tax code. Love simplification. What unintended consequence happened is, because there was that increase in standard deductions, so I think it was about 20,000, people could just take that standard deduction and move on and didn't have to itemize their deductions anymore. We actually saw a pretty significant drop in charitable giving from those who did not, who no longer needed to itemize. Not that people necessarily give to nonprofits so that they can, write it off on their taxes, but there did seem to be some kind of correlation between people no longer have to itemize. Thus, we saw a decrease in charitable giving. So that same standard deduction is up for debate and may be part of this 2025 tax debate as they work to either renew the things that were included in that piece of 2017 legislation or not. One thing that we are advocating for as a part of the nonprofit sector is a non-itemizer deduction, so that there would be a specific itemizer. People that take that standard deduction, if they give to charitable nonprofits, would still be able to itemize their charitable giving on top of that standard deduction. So they kind of get a twofer in their charitable giving and then still maintaining that standard deduction. So stay tuned on more of that, really fun tax debate as we move forward. But we are really pushing, we call it the non-itemizer, but for those that do not itemize, still receiving that deduction for charitable giving there at the federal level. The other thing that will be of interest and importance to the nonprofit sector, again, as a whole, but especially for nonprofits here in Tennessee, is what is affectionately known as the Johnson Amendment. This is what allows us to be nonpartisan and to remain nonpartisan. And if you receive pressure from a person in a political stance or political party from, you should donate to my campaign, you're like, oh, I can't, nonpartisan, sorry. That gives us protection to remain outside of those, sticky conversations and sticky debates. And has been an area where in previous administrations, especially under kind of the current administration that's coming in, we did see a lot of conversation around the Johnson Amendment, having that revoked. So essentially, nonprofits could become partisan, where you could have, Republicans leaning nonprofits and Democratic leaning nonprofits and independent and any other, political party out there. This is not a great thing. Being nonpartisan protects us from getting into the middle of partisan squabbles and allows us to just focus on our mission and actually create the impact that we want to see in our community. So that's a big one for us. And then last, but certainly not least, the budget reconciliation process. As you might have heard, kind of some discussion about that big, beautiful budget bill that's coming out. We are moving through budget reconciliation. So trying to avoid having to go through the House. And what is important about the budget reconciliation is any funding that you might have, if you have active presence at the state or at the national capital and received any kind of earmarks or anything like that. Earmarks cannot be moved forward with, people just kind of pushing that budget deadline down the road. It has to be part of an approved budget. So budget reconciliation, very important for nonprofit funding through earmarks, as well as budget reconciliation for a lot of different federal funding streams that, again, your nonprofit may receive funding through from the state, and how all of those different funding streams make their way down from the federal government to states and then are distributed there. So we will see a lot of conversation around budget reconciliation, especially when it comes to not necessarily balancing the budget, but they are going to have a number. We want to have a budget of, let's just call it $3 trillion. We need to get to $3 trillion. What are we funding and what are we not? Which brings us down to the key consideration for nonprofits. And this is the same consideration for federal level as state level, is when we get to that, how are we spending our money, our big, beautiful budget money? What kind of priorities are they going to put forward? If we only have X amount of dollars, how are those going to be spent? And do our sector's goals align with those? For example, that universal kind of non-itemizer tax deduction that I just shared that we're pushing for, how will that, or how may that stand up against some proposed legislation like no tax on tips? So if we're not taxing any tips anymore, that tax revenue is coming out of the budget and cannot be spent. So does that mean we can also have still provide people who give to charitable nonprofits, can they still deduct those from their taxes, also decreasing revenue? So anyway, just something to kind of think about and consider, again, if you're at the federal level or even the state level, how is that money flowing, and how are what we are spending or are we not spending being prioritized? So let's talk about moving into the state context, our context. Tennessee, great state of Tennessee. So again, for our legislative session, today is the day it begins. Ring-a-ding-ding, happy new legislative session. And that usually ends around late April, early May-ish, kind of depending on how, expedient and everything like that kind of moves forward. I even saw someone say, sometimes we even finish in March. I have not seen that in a very long time, but I guess it could be, we might finish in March too. Who can say? Highly doubt it, but maybe. So later in the spring, but that end date is determined by how quickly our folks there at the state capitol kind of are moving through the legislation that they need to move through and getting all their stuff done. One little thing that might kind of throw when things are being wrapped up into a little bit of a loop is there has been something teased, which is called a special session. And what a special session does, because I actually had to ask this question. I was like, we are in session. How do we have a special session in session? And it's a good question, or at least a question I'll answer. And a special session is a specific chunk of time, usually a couple weeks, where the only things that the legislators will discuss, debate, consider is whatever topic that special session is being called for. Nothing else is going to be discussed while they are in special session. Well, my goodness, what might the special session be called on? And this one, the word on the street is might be in late January. So just here in a couple weeks, they might have a special session on three things. One, potentially school vouchers, which right now is running under Senate Bill / House Bill 1, which is the Education Freedom Act of 2025. The other thing that they will include in that special session is Hurricane Helene relief funding. And then the third, which is a little less exciting, is some potential comptroller kind of corrections type things. So if they have a special session, it'll most likely be in late January. They will cover those three items, and then it will wrap up within probably a couple weeks after it is called, maybe 2 to 3 weeks. It might go longer. And then after that special session ends, then we go into regular session. So it'll be kind of a smooth process, but that may, kind of move the timeline a little bit around so that they have time for both a special session and their regular session where they go through the rest of their bills. The other kind of couple areas of kind of legislative focus, we have started to kind of go through all of the bills that are being filed. Legislators have until, actually, they haven't set a deadline yet, but usually kind of end of January, beginning of February, there will be a bill filing deadline where once, we'll call it January 31st, just for a nice end mark. By January 31st, if you have a bill that has not been filed, sorry, Charlie, see you next year on that one. You have to have all your bills filed before this bill filing deadline, which has not been announced yet, but we'll know. So until that deadline, we are reviewing all the legislation that is being proposed at the moment. And we've seen just kind of a few kind of legislative areas of focus, which again, might be important for nonprofits. We've already talked about the Education Freedom Act of 2025. That is our kind of school voucher bill. It has a couple other things included in that, included a teacher bonus and a few other kind of items. Hurricane Helene relief, of course, both of those would be special session topics if that does move forward. And then the other two, again, just kind of some trends. Two different bills have currently been filed along these similar lines, focused around removing taxes on groceries or food items. That has been kind of started the conversation last year. And then it looks like that is continuing into this year. And then last but not least, the Speaker of the House has also kind of floated the potential to add some pieces of legislation in where state departments would need to get legislative approval for federal funds. And why that one would be important for nonprofits is a lot of the funding that you receive through state contracts, assuming you receive, state grants and contracts, or funding from the state in some form, most of that money comes from federal funding. So depending on what that piece of legislation looks like, we will watch that very closely. And I'll also share some other pieces of legislation that we at TNN are watching very closely as well, because that would really impact a lot of the funding that is currently coming to nonprofits across the state. So those are some key kind of legislative area focus. Again, there will also probably be a lot of conversation around gun control and public safety, as well as, oh gosh, I forgot the other one, but there's a couple other conversations that were happening last year that of course will continue, but from the nonprofit kind of broader lens, those were kind of the big four that kind of popped out to us. Okay, so we know kind of what the context is for, the Tennessee legislative session. What's the timeline? What are they going to be talking about? Kind of how does all that move forward? Why would a Tennessee legislator really care about what the nonprofit sector thinks in Tennessee? What would hold sway for them? Well, our sector is actually kind of a big deal. So for workforce development was the other one that I was thinking about, as kind of a focus for Tennessee. And that's important for us, because the state, so here in Tennessee, we actually have close to 40,000 nonprofits in the state. You can see the actual number there, and this is based on 2023 data. So that number may wiggle around depending on which data set you're from, but this is from the IRS in 2023. And of those roughly 40,000 nonprofits, we contribute over 7% of our state's GDP, which is in line with some other sectors, such as construction, such as technology, such as, some of those other kind of big ticket items that a lot of legislators will think about when they think, oh, workforce development, economic impact, some of those nice big, speaking words. Nonprofits are toe-to-toe with those guys when it comes to economic impact here in our state. We bring in over $31 billion in revenue. And what's important about that is only a small position or a small portion of that is in donations and charitable donations. As you can see, Tennesseans donated about 3.8 billion, which is nothing to sneeze at, but is only about 10% of that total annual revenue that we're bringing in. So where's those other portions of revenue? That is earned income. That is federal funding. That is state funding. That is other areas of revenue. We bring money and economic activity to this state. Other thing, we are almost 10% of Tennessee's workforce is employed by nonprofits. And we are not the, career of choice for recent college graduates either. We have over half of our workforce is actually over the age of 40. And the majority of us have a bachelor's or higher. And then over half of us have an annual income of 75,000 or higher. So again, we are a workforce in a sector that has significant talent, significant resources, and actually is a significant career option for Tennesseans, again, across the state. Again, why do we care? Because Tennessee as a whole, Governor Lee as well, is putting a lot of focus on workforce development and making sure people have access to high quality careers. We are high quality careers, as you can see, especially healthcare, education, kind of our big two. But as you can see from folks represented here, we, as the nonprofit sector, represent a lot of different areas of focus and areas of service too. So do not feel bashful about, we're kind of a big deal, y'all. So they should want to know what we have to say because we are a significant part of Tennessee's economy and workforce and everything there. So I digress. Okay, so for the 2025 key issues that, again, as a network, we are promoting and watching out for, and is kind of part of our public policy agenda. We have eight different areas that we really focus on, but just kind of wanted to boil down to three priority areas for this session. Again, as Tennessee Nonprofit Network, so we advocate on your behalf. But then always are open and would love to know and hear from y'all on other areas that you're watching as well. But kind of our first area is fair and supportive contract terms and regulations for government grants and contracts. So for, state funding, if you're entering into contracts with the Department of Human Services or the Department of Education or, one of those state departments, do you have fair contracting terms? Are you going to be paid on time? If you're not paid on time, is there some kind of recompense? What are those things that are in, can you get upfront funding or does it have to be through reimbursements? Some of those areas. So that is definitely a focus for us. It was in 2024. It will be the same again. And we've been in conversation with a lot of different state leaders around that particular area. And we will continue to do so because it's important, because we want y'all to be paid and continue to make that economic impact that we have. Second is advancing Tennessee's nonprofit sector and our economic impact. Those kind of go hand in hand. Again, educating legislators, educating the public about who we are as a sector, the importance that we play in our communities, some of those things, so that people will take the nonprofit sector as seriously as some of our for-profit businesses. There's a table and conversations being made and had. We need to be at that table because we are important. Then third, last but certainly not least, also supporting robust and thriving nonprofit workforce and addressing some of those challenges. So training, public funding for said training, childcare, some of those things that are current issues and current barriers to the nonprofit sector's workforce. How can we address those issues and how can we best support? So those are kind of our three, I'll say, priority issues that some of our other things fall in. We do have our public policy agenda published on our website, if anyone is just curious. But again, those are kind of the three areas that we track. And as I share our legislation that we're currently tracking, will fall into one of those three buckets as well. So without further ado, how do we as nonprofits here in the state of Tennessee best stay kind of in the loop and educated about what is going on at that state house up in Nashville, Tennessee? Well, I'm glad you asked. Tennessee actually has a fantastic website that we are about to go to. And here it is, capital.tn.gov. This is the website for the Tennessee General Assembly. And we are very fortunate because it is actually kind of a highly developed website. It's actually kind of helpful. So let me see if I can work my technology magic. Can y'all still see my screen? Okay, I see a head nod. Thank you. And here it is. So again, capital.tn.gov if anyone wants to follow along. And on here is a wealth of resources that you can utilize in order to do and accomplish whatever your legislative goal might be. And your goal may be as simple as that Education Freedom Act of 2025 really will be important to my nonprofit, or there's a piece of legislation, House Bill 1234, that is really important for our folks. And I just kind of want to know what's going on. Don't need to, impact anything, but I just want to track it. Well, I will show you how you can do that because it's actually quite simple. But just a quick kind of overview of the website itself. We have up at the top, legislators, legislation, videos, schedules and calendars, committees, and directory. All of these house a lot of different resources that you can utilize in order to accomplish your goals. Again, whatever your legislative goals or policy goals, advocacy goals might be. There's also these very fun buttons, one with Find My Legislators, where if you're like, I don't even know who my legislator is. Well, there's an easy button, and then we will go to in just a minute, for that. And then if you do have bills that you are tracking, you can actually track them right here on the website. And I have done so. So we will kind of quickly walk through what that kind of looks like. The other thing I would be remiss to point out is, again, I told you, if you are a C-SPAN watching type, congratulations. You can also watch the Tennessee legislature doing their thing right here on their website. So you've got the Senate, you've got the House of Representatives, and any joint sessions. So when they come together, all of that, again, just right here on the homepage with just a little bit of an overview of what that schedule is for today. As you can see, Tuesday, January 14th, the Senate is currently in their first day of organizational day. Looks like tomorrow they'll have a second organizational day, and so on and so forth. House of Representatives, all of those good things. You also have quick links to the House schedules and calendars for, maybe when they'll have a floor session, what their committees may look like, anything like that. Just some really quick, easy buttons down here as well. And if you're like, man, I've got, 30 minutes, I'm going to eat some lunch, I would love to watch something being streamed. Well, you can click what's streaming now. This is for the Senate and House. So looks like no current active meetings. So both of the floor sessions that were happening earlier today aren't being streamed anymore. Rats. I know somebody out there was like, I would love to watch that. Not currently being streamed, but never you fear. Anything that is streamed is also recorded. So up here at the videos tab, you have access to all the Senate videos, all the House videos, and then all of the joint videos. So I had to do this last session where I missed a committee meeting that I really needed to, well, who am I kidding? I would really like to listen in on and hear what the conversation was. I could go back to the video database, look it up, whatever the date was, whatever the time was, and then I could watch it there. So never fear if you missed your streaming opportunity. They will be recorded and then posted live here under this videos tab. So let's bounce back. So we're back here kind of at home base, and just wanted to kind of walk through a few quick things. One is your legislators. This is important, where you've got, up here under the legislator tab, main members, all of that. That's great if you want to have a list of all the legislators. I'll just click on one. Let's go to the Senate. Who are our Senate members? Bloop, bloop, bloop. Here is a list of all the Senate members, all of the bills that they might be sponsoring in all the districts. But you're like, okay, that's a lot of information. That's a lot of people. Who do I need to care about? Let's just go to find my legislator. And you click here. Then you'll find a very fun, somewhat confusing map of Tennessee that is covered in green and purple squiggles, which are actually districts, but just kind of looks like noodles to me. And then you can put in the address of either yourself or your nonprofit. I cannot remember the address for us here, so let's see who my personal legislature is. And here we go. Myself, personally, Natalie Jones, I am represented by Senator Paul Rose, who is a Republican. And then I'm also represented by Deborah Moody, who's also a Republican. That's what the R means. If you see a D, they're a Democrat. If you see an I, they're an independent. All of that can be found just in your little, address finder here, with Steve Cohen is my congressional district. Huzzah. Now, if you're like, I wonder what my legislator has been up to. Well, you can just click on their fun little name, and then voila, you will see whatever their page is. You've got their email address right here. You've got their Nashville specific address. So he is in Suite 734 in the Cordell Hall building, which, fun fact, means he's on the 7th floor. So he's kind of a big deal. And then also their staff contacts. Whenever you email this person, whoever this person may be, this is Senator Paul Rose, but whoever your legislator is, always, always, always CC whoever their staff contact is. I'm going to repeat that. Always CC whoever their staff contact is. For this, it would be Linda Klingman. If I'm emailing a legislator, always CC their person, because 9 times out of 10, it's their staff contact who's going to be reading their emails and then letting their representative know, either their senator or their representative, hey, you should check out this email because these folks get a lot of emails. So their staff contact is your best line of defense when it comes to actually getting your email read. Also, there's other, kind of some fun facts on here. Again, this is standard for any and all senators or representatives. We're just going to pick on sweet Senator Rose. Thank you, sir. You've got some personal information here. You see what committees that they are on. So this gentleman is the chair for the Joint Judiciary and Government. He's also a member of the Fiscal Review Committee, Government Operations, those kinds of things. And then also what's important is community involvement. So you can kind of see what they have pointed out are big things for them. So, for example, if you were going to meet with Senator Rose, you can see that he has not been a member for very long. He's only served about 4 years there in the Senate, so he's kind of new-ish. Some have been here for a very long time. Others are kind of freshmen. I think we had 20 or so new representatives coming in, so freshmen, folks who have never served before, starting their brand new term. But also it looks like, children's issues may be a big deal for him. He sits on, the Boys and Girls Club board. He's on the board of trustees for the Tennessee Baptist Children's Home. He's been the president before. So just with community involvement, whoever your person is, if you're going to meet with them or whatnot, just taking a peek at this and seeing, okay, who is this person? What might kind of sway them or be important to them? Then the last thing, again, this will be on every single person's page, is do not forget to check out their bills. So this is brand new. Okay. Yesterday he didn't have anything up here. Because it was just filed today. But you can see all of the bills that they have filed for this session. Right now, Senator Rose has sponsored only one, this kind of Supreme Court thing that's here. You'll see the last action that has happened. So it was introduced today, passed on first consideration. So they were like, yep, sounds good, moving on. And this will be put to committee. A committee has not been assigned yet. It does not look like. And then going forward, you'll also see if they've co-sponsored anything, if they've sponsored any resolutions, things of that nature. But anything that has your representative's fingerprints on will be captured here on their website. So you don't have to, seek out, who sponsored what are they sponsoring that? I don't know. You can just go to their kind of personal page and then see exactly what bills are being sponsored by them. So let's go back to our homepage now. So we know who our legislator is or who they might be. Let's talk about legislation. So there's a couple different ways to know about different pieces of legislation and what you may or may not be interested in. One is if you hear about, how I've heard, maybe read in the newspaper, read an email about this, heard it in the line at the grocery store, who can say? That House Bill 123 is something that I actually want to find out about. Well, you can just type it in here. House Bill, we'll do House Bill, let's go 1. That's our education bill. You can just stick it in as easy as that up here in the search bar and call it a day. And as you can see, this is the Education Freedom Act of 2025. And I'm only picking on this piece of legislation because it's number one. It's the first one that was filed actually back in 2024. So it's easy to remember. But so House Bill 1 is this. I'll actually type in one that we are following, House Bill 49. Oh, this is not, I got the number wrong. Well, this is House Bill 49. So what does it do? Something with district attorneys. So it always shows you some kind of little summary, any actions that have been done with this. And again, this is brand new into session, so these kind of look really boring. Later on in the session, these will look far more interesting. And there will be two. There will be a House bill and a Senate bill if it's moving forward, because in order to pass, if we remember, I'm just a bill on Capitol Hill, it has to pass both the House and the Senate in order to become a law. So every single bill that we talk through will have both a House bill and a Senate bill. Just to show you what that looks like. Bing, going back to number one. Senate Bill 1, House Bill 1. You can see all of the activities for both sides. Also, if a piece of legislation has any amendments, the very handily named Amendments tab will show you what those amendments may be. Right now, we don't have any amendments because it has not been heard yet. And then what's also really helpful is videos. So when these bills go before committee, because all bills, regardless, go through, well, sometimes special session has special rules because they're special, but most bills heard in regular session will always go through committee. Some of them even have to go through subcommittees to get to the committee that then gets to the House floor. So it is a very step 1, subcommittee, step 2, committee, step 3, House floor. And then it gets really fun if they're like, oh, this is the wrong committee. You get referred to this other committee. Oh, you get to go to another committee. Sometimes they have 4 committees that one poor little bill has to make it all the way through in it to get to that final floor session. And then you get to do it all over again in the Senate or the House. You get to do it bicameral. But any of those sessions, again, are recorded, and you can find all of that video evidence right here on that page as well. And they'll all be listed here. So if you want to go back and watch the fun conversation, you again do not have to sort through hours and hours and hours of video. You will find that just right here on the bill page. And then they've also got some, some summary notes. If you don't want to read the full bill, they do have it summarized somewhat. Sometimes their summary is helpful. Other times it's slightly shorter gobbledygook. But you will have a summary for every bill. And then the fiscal summary, which is known as a fiscal note. If this bill costs money, it has to have a fiscal note and a fiscal summary, which usually is something as exciting as this bill will cost umpteen dollars to implement, or it has, no impact or something like that. So usually these are, pretty short, pretty sweet, but we'll let you know if there is any money. Actually, let me pause here. Am I seeing any? Oh, I do see a question. So do both the House and the Senate have separate committees? That's a great question. Yes, both the House and the Senate have separate committees. Some of them may overlap in topic. So for example, education. House has an education committee, Senate has an education committee, but they are not the same people on that committee. So they are different. So a piece of legislation, such as House Bill 1 and Senate Bill 1, will have to go through both committees in order for it to reach, the House and the Senate floor. So great question. And then are bills going through the House and the Senate at the same time? Usually not. Usually it'll go through, actually, I'm going to say it would be very, 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 very rare. I don't want to say never, never say never, but it would be incredibly rare for a bill to go through both sides of the House at the same time, because most of the time what happens is you will have a approved version. Usually things go through the House first because it's a little bit harder to, because there's so many people, harder for legislation to get through the House, and then it pops over to the Senate. But you have to have an approved version of a piece of legislation go through the House, and then that approved piece of legislation goes through the Senate. And if the Senate like looks fantastic, sign our name, co-sign, sponsored, off to the governor's office you go to get signed into law, we're good. But if the Senate is like, ooh, this approved House bill, we actually want to tweak this, or this, then once that Senate approved version is approved, it actually has to go back over to the House. So in order for something to go through both sides at once, you would basically be kind of like, it'd be a really weird group chat where you're like, oh, I like this. No, I like that. No, I like this. No, I like that. Take that out. Da, 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 da. So it's easier if you just have one bill that gets approved. Once that language is signed, sealed, delivered by one side of the House, either the House of Reps or the Senate, then it pounces over to the other side for it to be either approved or amended. And then if it was amended, to get reapproved by, whichever the origin was. So hopefully that made sense. So perfect. Cool. Then great question. The other piece, so this kind of throws you through. Oh, and on that note, as things get approved or disapproved, you actually can see what the floor and committee votes are. So as it goes through committee, a piece of legislation goes through committee, and then hopefully it goes to the floor, if it's a good bill. You can actually see who voted yay and who voted nay. So, underneath the House, if it's the, education committee, you'll see, yays 14 and nays 2 or something like that. House floor, yays 57, nays 42, you can see who voted yay, who voted nay. And then also, is this really popular? Everybody was like, great idea, love it, let's go. Or if there was like, ooh, I don't know, a lot of dissension. So you can see for each bill, again, what their vote count is. Speaking of committees, let's bounce over here. So again, going up to our top, thankfully, this little taskbar just kind of hangs out with you as long as you are on this website. You have a list of all of the committees also at your fingertips. So under, your legislative committees, here are the various Senate committees. Kind of a lean, mean, fighting machine list. You've got a list of the House committees, slightly longer, not all that much longer. And then your joint committees, which are, just over here, which those have members of both the House and the Senate who work on those committees. House committees are only House members, Senate committee, only Senate members. That's kind of a easy way to remember, who does what. If it's joint, means there's representatives from both houses, and then Senate or House, it's just their exclusive club on those particular ones. As you can see, again, the House has, an education, actually they have 2 education committees. We'll look at Education Commission Administration. You can see the committee officers who are a part of that particular committee. You will also see committee members, the men and women who actually serve on that particular committee. This actually looks like a boys' club. Okay. There's a lot of men on there. Usually there's some women on the committee, but that's okay. You'll also see the calendar, the schedule, again, any videos, and then also if you have subcommittees. The House is notorious for subcommittees. They love themselves a good subcommittee. So if a committee has any subcommittees, those will be linked right there. And again, you can see, who's their chair, who's their members, et cetera, et cetera. So I would highly recommend just, clicking around, getting familiar with these different things, because it's ways for you to get familiar with these different, different committees and different things. Before I run out of time, because I do want to make sure we have some time for questions, is going to my bills, because this is a great tool if you are trying to track legislation. You will have to, at the very beginning, set up an account for yourself. It's very simple, very easy. I already have an account, so it just kind of popped me in here, which is nice. You don't have to log in like 1,000 times. And then you can actually create different lists. So you've got, my 2025 member watch list. If anyone reaches out and is like, hey, I'd like you to, watch whatever, I'm happy to put it on my watch list just to kind of keep tabs on it. I've got my Tennessee priority lists and then my TNN watch list as well. Watch list means, I'm interested. I want to know kind of what's going on because it may have a big impact on a lot of our members, like, education bills, healthcare bills, workforce bills, things of that nature, but we may or may not take an active stance on. Priority bills are ones that we will take a stance on one way or another. And again, we've got kind of a couple different ones already: Senate Bill 37, Senate Bill 42, and then it was 46. I think I did 49. This was the bill I was trying to find earlier. House Bill 46, which really has to do with some contract rules and regs around late payment and things of that nature. Right now, it is focused on child advocacy centers. We're hoping to, maybe broaden that out a little bit. Who can say? But this is a great starting point in our very humble opinion. So we track that. Well, how do you put bills on here? That sounds like a great idea. Well, you can search bills and then, search by whatever. Let's do House Bill 1 because I remember at least what that is. And then you can click on it and then you can add to your list. And then lo and behold, here it is under my member watch list. So it's very easy to do. I know I just like sped ran through that. So if anyone would like to know a little bit more, like, hey, how'd you do that? Happy to walk people through, but I do want to be cognizant of time. And we are getting close to it. So let me pause there and answer any questions, if we had any questions. Nope.
There was one in the chat.
Yeah.
Do both the House and Senate have separate committees? Example, does each have its own education committee, and are the bills going through the House and Senate at the same time?
Oh, and I think we did answer that kind of in conversation.
Oh, we did. Okay. Okay. Just want to double check.
Katie, I do see your hand.
Yes, I have another question. Thank
Sure.
you. This has been super informative. You mentioned like that you will go support different bills with nonprofits. How does that work? And like, I know there's laws about lobbying. Like, where's that line?
Great question. So for TNN, we do support bills that have a general impact on the nonprofit sector. So bills dealing with workforce, with, taxes, with contracting, things of that nature. So for example, House Bill 1, which is very education specific, we would not necessarily take an active stance. However, we will happy to support anyone on a subsector issue however we can, whether that's, talking about what is advocacy versus lobbying, or, however we can best support. That is what we are here to do. Now, to your question on advocacy versus lobbying, let me share my screen one more time here. For that question, it is advocacy as long as there is not a specific ask attached to it. So, you're talking about House Bill 1 does this, and this. That is not lobbying. That is just educating someone and advocating for what it is. And you can also say House Bill 1 is doing X, Y, and Z, and this is why X, Y, and Z is a good idea, bad idea, pros, cons, however you want to educate others about that topic. Now, it bings over into lobbying, which you can still do as a nonprofit. We can lobby. but it turns into lobbying when there's a specific ask. So when you say vote yes on House Bill 1 because we love it, or vote no on House Bill 1 because we hate it, or vote meh on vote House Bill 1 because we're meh about it, that is lobbying. So if you don't have an ask attached, it's advocacy. If it is an ask, it's lobbying. But do not worry, unless you are a full-time lobbyist, you are still covered most likely by advocacy lobbying protections under the 501c3 code. But happy to chat more about that if that is a concern.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then let's see here. So I see another question about how can we as nonprofits connect with others that are advocating for similar legislation? We have an organization supporting individuals with intellectual disabilities. I cannot speak English. So great question. So one of the things is if you reach out to us, we are happy to connect you with different coalitions and different, if we know of others that are working pieces of legislation, we are happy to make those connections between you and them. Or if we, have multiple people reaching out about the same piece of legislation, can also help make those warm introductions as well, even between the network. So that's one of the things that, we can help connect people on if you're like, we want, to support this or that or do something, but we just don't know who. We can help make some of those connections since we are statewide. Yes, and then the presentation and materials will be available after the meeting. So we will get that shared out. So let me pause here because I know we are right at time. I am happy to hang around and answer any other questions, have some additional conversation. I do not have anywhere to go, but I do understand we are just past 3 and I do want to be cognizant of time. So there's a lot of information to cover today. Hopefully this was helpful. We will send out both the recording and the presentation as well. And my email, I'll put it in the chat, is tnnonprofits.org. So if you want to connect another time, again, I am here. This is what I love. I'm a C-SPAN watcher. So happy to connect with y'all and talk more about anything that's going on with y'all and your advocacy work for the legislative session. So again, I will hang out here, and happy to answer any questions, but thank y'all again for attending. Have a fabulous rest of your afternoon. Hope to see you on Thursday morning at 9 for how to have a successful day on the Hill. And hope that we can see you at Advocacy Summit and Day on the Hill in February as well. So take care, everyone. And then if we could stop the recording. All right. Hi, everyone. Now, was there any other, I know we kind of had to, at least in cognizant of time, any other like questions or anything for our